Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Mike Vonbeardingham here. Now, we've all heard the phrases vocal coach, vocal teacher, singing coach, singing teacher, and all the different iterations that there are out there on the internet. But the question is, who are they? What do they do? And why do we need them? Well, it just so happens I'm exceptionally fortunate to have in my life an absolutely awesome vocal coach by the name of Georgia Train. Now, not only is she an incredible singer who can do things like this, and this. She's also a phenomenal vocal coach. Definitely the best I've ever had. I've had a few in my time, but her in-depth knowledge of how all the different areas and all the different mechanisms of how the voice works, her knowledge is absolutely fantastic. She's also one of the best in the business for diagnosing vocal trouble, which is one of the reasons I went to her in the first place. I was having issues with my acid reflux attacking my voice. I was struggling with sort of pacing myself, certain high range elements of my voice, and after the first half an hour of her asking me various questions and running me through various exercises, she was able pretty much to diagnose me very, very quickly. So she agreed to have an interview with me, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and I hope you guys thoroughly enjoy too. I think it's one of those kind of interviews that's really essential if you want to get a glimpse into, like I say, what a vocal coach is and what they do, but also some of the kind of stigmas and misinformation that's out there about being a singer, and also some of the issues you can have with certain vocal coaches who maybe don't quite know their ins and outs of everything as they should. So without further ado, I give you, ladies and gentlemen, the fantabulous Georgia Train. Okay, hello everybody. It is my absolute privilege and pleasure to welcome my vocal coach extraordinaire, the mighty Georgia Train. Hello.
Hello.
How are we?
Very well. All good.
Excellent. That's a good start. Nothing worse than tuning in someone just going, everything's terrible.
Awful, yeah.
Awesome. Right, so how I know this marvellous human being is through a recommendation of a vocal coach. I was having some vocal problems and I needed someone to help me, and your name was mentioned, and I'm so glad it was, because I feel it's okay to blow some smoke up your derriere on this occasion. Hands down, the best vocal coach I have had, and I've had a few. So thank you, first of all, for all of your help.
Thank you.
So now that all that's out of the way, let's get on to the who, what, when, why, and how of Georgia Train. So tell us all about yourself.
Okay. Well, I'll give you my brief musical history, but it's not that brief, I'll warn you.
That's cool. We have time.
I guess it's important to know that I am both a singer and a songwriter, and along with performing as a singer, obviously, I'm also a vocal coach. So I began having singing lessons when I was about 10, alongside playing piano. And I then went to sort of study at musical theatre school, didn't really like that, ended up kind of going to more of the rock school sort of vibe. And then when I was at rock school, or, BIM, British Institute of Modern Music, I ended up forming a band. And it was with that band that I sort of, through doing my dissertation, which was essentially like, can I go on tour? Can I put out an album? Actually ended up kind of growing some legs with this band and continuing it post-university. And we were sort of relatively successful. We had, back in the day when social media was just on the rise, we went pretty viral, which was sort of a new concept at the time. Now it's like everyone's viral, so it doesn't matter. But then it was actually quite a cool,
it meant something
thing
back then.
I remember like the first big thing that we had was that Stephen Fry saw one of our music videos and retweeted it.
Oh, wow.
And then like over the course of an hour, we got like 200,000 plays. And that doesn't sound huge today, but at the time that was like mega.
That was monumental back in the day.
And off the back of that, we, long story short, we had like several opportunities open up with several artists that we wanted to play with. And we ended up going on lots of support tours and pretty much touring the world off the back of this one Stephen Fry tweet. So that was really cool. And, the playing some huge venues, playing some really small venues as well, like some house shows, house concerts and so far sounds and stuff like that. So some sort of right the way from completely acoustic a cappella stuff all the way to like playing at the Roundhouse, Brixton Academy.
Excellent.
And everything in between.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I do as a performer. That's all original material. It's like a mixture of, they call it like alternative indie rock, but there were all kinds of genres mixed in there, really. A lot of wild vocals, because that's my instrument. That's what I pride myself on. So vocals, kind of channeling anything from Jeff Buckley to Kate Bush to Freddie Mercury to Christina Aguilera to Whitney Houston, just any sort of singer that has what I would describe as like showy offy vocals.
Pipes
that's what I aspired to be, and I've kind of grown out of that a bit now. I'm a little bit more mellow with how I perform, but I do still love to belt, and I do still love to a bit of a gritty rock vocal, and then the issue with that is that back in the day, as I was sort of doing all of that experimentation and finding my voice, of course, what I discovered is that I might run into problems. And so when I was 19, if we rewind back to when I was at university and I was forming my band and creating that sound, I actually damaged my voice quite significantly.
Oh, really?
And I ended up with a polyp, not nodules, a polyp, which is, I won't go into the difference between the two. They're really similar. But the only way to treat a polyp, as opposed to nodules where you can sort of train yourself back to health, the only way to treat a polyp is to have surgery. So I had surgery on my vocal folds. And I was out of action at the time when I needed my voice the most, which was throughout my exams, final exams of the degree, and I had to take a back seat and rest and recover. But what it did was it really triggered something inside me to never have that happen to me again.
Yeah.
And so I went down a path of some pretty intense research on vocal anatomy. And I'm not going to lie, I got kind of quite angry at the training that I had had so far and why I hadn't been protected by my current vocal coaches. And perhaps like maybe I was too quick to blame people instead of blaming myself. But I felt like, hang on a minute, somebody should have told me about these issues that could have happened. I had no idea. And yet there I was in like the third year of a music degree, specializing in vocals. And I thought, actually, this is not okay. This needs to be, vocal health needs to be incorporated in the curriculum. It needs to be part of every singer's training. And so at the same sort of time, I was developing myself as a self-employed musician. And so I was starting to teach. And so just kind of organically, my teaching became quite anatomically focused and quite vocal health focused because I had had this experience. So alongside like going on tour and being a rock star, I was also really nerding it out by teaching all of this like really scientific anatomical stuff that I'd researched, and also working with the surgeon who had operated on my voice to generate like a series of vocal technique films that ended up being a documentary, which we can talk about later, but I hopefully will be releasing in the near future. So there's this really nerdy side, sort of scientific side of me as a singer, and then there's this performer side as well. And the two don't always mix very nicely. But I think when people know that and then they listen to the way I sing, I think it maybe makes a bit more sense as to how I got to that point as an artist. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell, that's sort of what I do. And if you've got any more questions, I'll answer them. But for now, I think that gives the backstory.
I have 1,000 questions.
Go for it.
So one of the ones that I picked up on, which is, I think, really important and really interesting, is when you said you were obviously going through your uni experience, and you said that you felt that people weren't pointing out the dangers of singing. Now, do you feel that is it due to sort of a lack of information, or a lack of education in that department? Did you feel it wasn't their place to say, you shouldn't be doing this with your voice, you should be doing this with your voice? Or do you feel that just the information wasn't there? They didn't have that educational level to be able to say to somebody, you need to be careful here, your technique here and here and here. I mean, did they educate you on your technique?
I think it's all of the above. It's sort of like two, if not three, if not fourfold. So being on the other side of the fence now, and one of the reasons why I said like maybe I was too quick to blame other people is because I now realize as a vocal coach that some people don't absorb what you're telling them about the vocal health. And it doesn't matter how good a vocal coach you are, there are some people that will just not want to listen to that. And when you tell them that they cannot use their voice in a particular way because it's going to cause them vocal damage, well, for them, that is, number one, it's a really difficult thing to do, to change your vocal style. And it means work, and it means discipline, and it means retraining and breaking habits. And it's actually quite hard. So there's a resistance to do that, to change. But there's also styling issues. So if somebody wants to sound like Dave Grohl and they don't naturally sound like Dave Grohl, they're going to run into problems, because Dave Grohl sings like that because he has the mechanism and he has the anatomy that just creates that sound. If I try to sing like that, what that means is I'm manipulating my voice dangerously. And we can go into why I say dangerously later. But I think that can be upsetting for some people to realize that actually not everyone can have grit and distortion on their voice, and not everyone can belt, and not everyone can have a range that incorporates whistle tones, because a lot of it is about understanding like where's my start point, not what can Mariah Carey do and why can't I do that. It's like, I need to know what I can do with my voice. So there's that side of things, which is the student or the person that you're working with and how receptive they are to the information. Then you asked me the question about was the knowledge not there? Were the tutors perhaps not well trained enough or well versed enough? That's like a really difficult thing to answer as well, because those tutors and a lot of tutors that you'll come across will be sometimes under the umbrella of a company, and sometimes being told what they're allowed to teach.
Sure.
Sometimes they're working with a really small space of time, or a huge classroom full of people and lots of different levels of singers. So it can't be like nuanced training. And I think that's where people run into issues, is when you try and apply a one size fits all style of coaching to everyone, it just doesn't work. And then the other thing, the reason I don't blame the teachers is because the information sometimes just isn't accessible.
Sure.
Not that it's not available, it physically isn't accessible. And that's part of the documentary that I'm working on, is to say, actually, nobody has been able to answer my question about how we produce a mix into belt voice, because nobody's shoved a camera down their throat while they're doing it.
Yeah.
And nobody's actually looked at the thickness of the vocal folds and the waveform of the vocal folds as they're doing it. So somebody needs to do this research. There is no knowledge for these singing teachers to base their training on until somebody's gone and done it. And so I don't think it's their fault necessarily. But on the flip side, so many singing teachers will just, for want of a better expression, will just let you have a karaoke session rather than actually give you a singing lesson. And so my red flag for anybody interested in singing lessons that might be watching this is, if you feel like you're going in and you're kind of just singing the songs that you want to sing, you're, just having a fun time and nothing feels kind of challenging or thought-provoking, I think that would be a bit of a red flag that your teacher is perhaps not actually guiding you. And therefore you sort of start to ask why they're not guiding me, why they're not teaching me something and pointing out things that I'm doing wrong. Because ultimately I'm not afraid to say the word wrong. And I think, we can sometimes be a little bit too genteel as singing coaches, and a little bit, you've got to nurture your student and you've got to encourage them. But ultimately, the majority of students want to learn, and they want you to tell them what they're doing wrong, so that they can correct things. And there are, if you're a good singing teacher, you will be able to spot flaws and errors that will lead to bad vocal health. And I think it's important to point those out. And that's a different conversation than just saying you're doing this thing with your voice that I don't like, because that's subjective. That's a taste thing. But if something's going to damage the voice, you should be given that information.
This is a really good... we're going to, due to the time constraints on our wonderful Zoom meeting, we are just going to quickly cut in and out now. So I think that leads really nicely into the question of what is the role of a vocal coach, because I think there's a lot of, from what I've heard from people, there's a lot of misconceptions about what a vocal coach is, why you would bring one in, and at what point would you bring one in your career? Because I think some people I sadly heard the misconception that people think if you have to have a vocal coach, it's like cheating. It's like, oh, you need help to sing, do you? Well, I kind of look at it as, well, if you look at all the top athletes, they all have coaches. Mm-hmm. They're not all up there doing it themselves. They need people there to guide them, to correct them, to offer them different advice, probably from a point of view where you whether it's a singer or an athlete, you may not be able to, it's very hard to look outside yourself and look at what you're doing and correct it. You need those ears and eyes to help do it for you. So what would you say? So you've obviously had experience all through the different levels, whether it's been people who are starting to sing, professionals calling you in. So where would you say the most common area for bringing in a vocal coach would be?
So first of all, I think, is there a definition in your mind between singing teacher and vocal coach?
I would say the same thing. For me, they are somebody who, so I would look at it like an athletics coach. They usually, if you want to achieve a certain something, or you want to learn a new skill set, or you're having problems, you go and see a singing vocal coach to help sort of steer you, correct you, to impart knowledge on you and guide you. That's what I would say.
I mean, and I ask that question because depending on who I speak to, I will call myself a singing teacher, a vocal coach, a vocal rehabilitator. I can be any one of those three things. Ultimately, what we're talking about is an instrument, and somebody needs to learn how to use it. And a good vocal coach will be able to encompass everything from absolute beginner through to somebody who's been on stage for a world tour and has come back from the tour and now has, screwed their voice up and needs rehabilitation, right? So it's a wide spectrum of like training styles. But ultimately, why would anyone need a vocal coach, or at what point would you need a vocal coach? Well, it's like any other instrument, right? So you would never say to a pianist that if you need piano lessons, you're not a real, it's cheating. We're a wind instrument. You would never say that to someone who plays trumpet or something. Like it baffles me, but I can see where it comes from. And it's because everybody has access to this instrument. Most people, anyone that can vocalize, has access to this instrument. And so it almost feels like it's part of your personality, it's part of your soul, is just your voice. And so really what people are referring to there is like, well, if you have like a speaking voice and you just open your mouth and you're able to sing in tune, that's the sort of singer that I want to listen to. And that's all good and well. And there are some people that do that, and you might call that like a natural voice, which I have issues with, because the word natural simply means that that person hasn't needed to develop their voice to achieve the goal that they want to achieve. We're not all blessed with that. We go back to the idea of an athlete. Some people do have natural qualities physically that may make them quicker to succeed in certain athletic sports. It's exactly the same with, the voice is part of our body. It's exactly the same thing, So there are people that could be fantastic athletes, but they're going to have to train hard. Doesn't mean that they're not all aiming for the same destination. And I just feel like training as well gets a really bad rep. And I in an industry where I work with lots of rock vocalists, you got two types of rock singers. You got old school rock and roll singers who want to stay up until 4:00 in the morning writing songs and drinking whiskey, and not training. Or you've got rock singers who are shredding on guitar and they're actually really nerdy about anything scientific and anatomical. And they're the ones that generally, they're like, training, cool. Like, we like training. But training can be seen as a bit uncool. It depends what side of the academic fence you sort of fall on, I think. So it's just this weird contradiction as to like, why wouldn't someone want vocal lessons? And I think it's a personality trait as much as anything. But for me, a vocal coach can be as simple as, I am going to teach you how to pitch your voice, all the way through to, we're going to work together to get the most out of your voice, through to, okay, this professional person has a really rigorous tour coming up and needs to know how best to improve their stamina or how to recover from a vocal injury. For somebody like yourself, who's already an advanced singer, when I come to meet you, it's about looking at really quickly understanding your vocal history, really quickly getting a grasp on what style of singing you do and how you're achieving that and where your knowledge gaps might be, and filling in any knowledge gaps, but also offering suggestions on like, hey, here's a different way to achieve the same tone that might feel easier. Or do you realize that when you sing that, you're actually trying a bit too hard for volume? You could relax that, because it's like spotting these things that only an outsider will spot, because ultimately you're not going to hear your instrument in the same way that your audience will hear your instrument, because you're inside it. So acoustically, you will believe that you sound a different way to what in actuality you sound like to the rest of the audience. So it's really important that you have a soundboard at least. And that's sometimes all that a vocal coach needs to be, is someone that just goes, you know what, hey, that actually sounds great. And you are ready for that audition, or you're ready for that gig. Other times they might rip you to shreds.
Well, that actually in the lessons that we've had. And one of the reasons I was recommended to you, these were her words. She is the best in the business for diagnosing vocal issues. So that is officially your title. And yeah, it was one of the things, I think it was probably in our first, maybe second lesson, that you pretty much narrowed it straight down to, these are where I believe your issues come from. We did some kind of corrective posture things. And even in that, within a couple of lessons, when I went to my shows, I noticed a difference. And it was almost instantaneous. I was having real confidence issues. I was sort of scared of going for notes. I was sort of pulling back in myself. You could see when I was singing, I was very kind of reserved, felt if I go for this, this might go wrong. And in that short space of time, when you were saying, look, what I think you're not doing here, you're not connecting everything properly. You need to be using your diaphragm properly. Assume the position, Michael. And, have myself singing as I mean to go on, kind of thing, rather than going, oh, I'm a little bit scared, I'm a little bit sheepish. It's like, no, own it, command it. This is what you need to be doing. And it made such a massive difference. Even our guitarist, who knows me better than anybody, he said, Jay, you're singing so much better. And that was just in the space of a couple of lessons.
Yeah.
So
there are some things that, and this is why I think everyone should have a few sessions with a vocal coach, because there are some things that can be fixed instantly.
Yeah.
And I think that's a common misconception as well about instrument lessons and vocal lessons, is you think, oh God, people train for years. I haven't got the money to train. I haven't got the time to train. Somebody's already been training for 10 years and I'm 10 years older than them. How am I ever going to catch up? Don't let it stop you, because there are going to be certain things that if you're seeing the right vocal coach, they will go, do this. And you'll go, oh, and it's there, and it's like magic. I'm really realistic as well about, timelines with my clients and students. Is I'll tell you quite honestly, this is going to take 10 years to develop. This is going to take 6 months to develop. This is going to happen in an hour, So I think there are certain things that do need a lot of discipline and a lot of time and repetition, but there are so many things that if you've got the right person listening to you and you've got someone who's really acutely focused on your voice and how it's working and has the ability to then demonstrate back to you and describe back to you a way for you to connect with your voice differently. So that might be an anecdote, or it might be that I give you a visual image. It might be that I tell you to think of a certain color or flower or whatever. If I've got the ability to communicate to you how to use your instrument differently, then you can open up different areas of the voice really, really quickly and really effectively. But this comes back to finding the right vocal coach for you, because and that's what I was saying about it shouldn't feel like a karaoke lesson. It shouldn't feel like you're like, okay, so sometimes one of my worries about my style of vocal coaching is that I do a lot of talking in the sessions. And it means that the clients probably don't do as much actual singing as they thought they were going to be doing in a lesson. Now, that's my style of teaching. And the reason I do that is because I'm not actually here to listen to you sing. I'm here to fix a very small part of a song. I don't need to hear the whole song. Once I've identified what's going wrong, let's just do that 3 seconds. And let's just focus on that. I think that's, in a nutshell, why you would need a vocal coach, when you would need a vocal coach, and like different styles of teaching, I guess.
Yeah. And I think, as you said, I heard, was it Adele really praised her vocal coach and said if it wasn't for her vocal coach, she would have lost her voice. Because obviously she'd been suddenly boosted into the limelight. She's gone from pretty much, I would say, obscurity to overnight sensation. And I could be completely wrong. My Adele knowledge is not that wonderful. But then she's out doing headline tours. And this is one of the massive differences I think that people don't realise is if you are a support band and you're going out on tour, you might be doing half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour tops. That's quite comfortable and doable for a band.
Yeah.
As soon as you hit the top slot, you are talking 2+ hours every night. And I know this is, and we'll probably talk more about vocal damage and everything like that. When you go back to the 80s, the big rock singers, whether it's, Bruce Dickinson, David Coverdale from Whitesnake, Paul Stanley from Kiss, all of these guys who are singing Up in the Gods, for the vast majority of their songs. Sebastian Bach from Skid Row was another one. They go in and do these absolutely phenomenal albums, with vocal performances to die for. But then it's like, now you've got to tour that, and you've got to do 2 hours of that every night for probably a year, with maybe one day off, if you're lucky, each week. That is a vocal feat that I just don't think a lot of them really understood, the level of demand that you're putting on your voice and your body.
No, and again, like, definitely content for another video, but it's really important to understand as a singer the difference between performing for the record in a studio and performing live, and how you're not supposed to be singing in the same way. You want to give the illusion of the same effects, and you want to give the illusion of the same vocal, but the way that you will achieve that live should never be the same as the way that you would achieve it in a small box with a ribbon mic or something. Like, it's just a completely different setup. So even that is another reason why you might want a vocal coach is, hey, I'm about to go on tour. I've got no idea how I'm supposed to sing how I'm supposed to sing my own record, like, how do I do this live? Because everything sounds different when I'm in a huge auditorium. So, so another reason why I think people might need, why professionals might need a vocal coach is because you're not supposed to be to just know these things. When you sound fantastic in a studio, doesn't mean you're going to sound fantastic on stage. A classic one we can demonstrate is Freddie Mercury. Now, his recordings, phenomenal. Let's all be honest, we all love Freddie Mercury. If you don't, there's something wrong with you. But whenever he went out on tour, he knew that, and again, I've never met the guy, but you can see from his performances that he knew that to give that belting quality and give it that power, you cannot go for those high vocal lines. You're not going to pull them off. So rather than sacrifice, the showmanship and the pelt behind sort of belting it out, he chose to change his melody lines. So, but for a lot of singers who have to go out there and hit those notes, I think there was somebody said something like professional singers sing 70% of the time, 100% of the time, or something like that regarding how much they deliver, because you've got to hold that bit back. Otherwise, if you're all guns blazing, you're going to peter out very quickly. Yeah. The way I always say it is we've all got a tiger in a cage, and you can let that tiger out in the studio because you want the studio recording. The challenge of that is to get the energy to come out of that speaker at the other end. Yeah. It's the opposite challenge when you're on stage, because when you're on stage, you've got the physicality and you've got the natural dynamic that is happening live with your voice that you're not getting through something that's compressed and mixed. And, the beauty of mixing a record is actually to squish the voice right down a lot. Yeah. We're not getting that on stage. So the danger is releasing your tiger on stage, because it never needs to be out of its cage. Like, you need to hold back, if anything. And that might seem really weird, because I bet there might be some people that will watch this that will go, oh, but I've seen this person and they were giving it 110% on stage. I go, well, you don't know that, because you don't know what them and their vocal coach were working on, and you don't know what them and their performance coach were working on. And actually, they're probably really good actors. And a lot of the work I do with my clients that are about to go on tour is, how do we make this feel like you're giving it 110%? but actually not doing that. How do we make this look effortless when actually, there's a massive amount of technical stuff going on inside that's keeping you centered and keeping you calm? And yet on the outside, you're thrashing around on stage, a lot of times playing an instrument at the same time, sometimes physically diving off the stage. How are we going to keep your voice calm in the center of all of that? And it's skill. And it can be learned. It's an illusion a lot of the time, and if you look at the great performers like Freddie Mercury, you see that happening.
Another one who actually, it was Meatloaf. I watched a documentary of him years ago, back in when he was in his prime. And he said, I'll let you on a little secret. He said that when people come up to you and go, wow, you made that look really easy. And he says, no, what I do, I make it look really hard. Yeah. So everyone just thinks that, he's tearing his soul out on stage. But
it's exactly that.
It's the difference between just being a singer and being a performer, isn't it? I think there is a big difference between the two. To be able to go out and command and put that show on rather than just going out and singing your lines and everything.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Controversial question.
Yeah.
Do you believe that everybody can sing?
No.
Thank you. I'm not the only one who thinks this.
No, I mean, obviously I'm doing myself out of a lot of business by saying that, because you will hear a lot of singing teachers, again, bit of a red flag maybe when you're looking for your vocal coach. If there's a vocal coach that goes, I believe anyone can learn how to sing, probably not a good vocal coach, because I don't think they're being honest.
No.
I think you can teach anybody the columns of what singing training looks like, and I believe you can get somebody to apply it to their voice and potentially sound better than they did sound. But the definition is, really comes down to, what does sing mean? Can I teach anyone to sing? Well, in my experience, and what you're really asking is, can I take anybody and make them sound good? You're not asking me, can I teach anyone to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star? And even that, there are people that I couldn't teach them how to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, not because they don't have an instrument, but because they don't have an ear.
That's what I was just going to say.
Connect the two. And an easy way to imagine this is, imagine that you've injured your hand and that somebody is asking you to draw a straight line. It's not your fault that you can't draw a straight line. But at that particular point in time, even though your brain is functioning and it's telling you and it's visualizing, the result is not what your brain is commanding. And that's a really easy way of sort of, I guess, drawing a picture, if you like, of what can be happening with the voice, which is that unless you have found that connection with your voice, which so many people haven't, and why would they? Because the voice, it's not really designed for singing. Singing is a byproduct of this anatomy that is essentially a protection against choking first and foremost. It's nothing to do with making beautiful sounds. So why would they have connection with it? And it's just like, well, they might be able to sing in their head, but can they actually produce that on an instrument? No. And I think you could just, again, like flip it on its head and ask the question, can you teach everyone how to drum? Can you teach everyone how to have rhythm? Like, no. You can probably get to a degree, again, like with singing, you can get to a degree where they can maybe go through the motions. Yeah.
But there's no natural connection. I've always found singing wise and I found this with most instruments, it's people who can't hear if they're out of tune, or when they sing and they go, and you go, oh, how do you think that was? And they're like, oh, or if they're singing completely off and they're like, yeah, I thought that was okay. It's when you can't hear your mistakes or you're singing out of tune, I think that's where you're at the point where you probably can't sing, because if you can't detect your own errors, then how do you build from that?
Yes, exactly. It's unconscious incompetence. So, and there is a learning cycle where you can teach someone to be consciously incompetent, and then they can become competent, but we end up going round again. And there's this cycle that a lot of people know about in education. If you've done any kind of teaching, you've probably heard of that cycle. But ultimately, there are a lot of people that will be unconsciously incompetent for the rest of their lives with singing. And that is just because they cannot connect the dots. They don't have the awareness of the instrument. And it is a really, really difficult instrument to gain awareness of because you can't see it. So there's huge obstacles in the way for people to be able to sing in the first place. And some sort of magic happens in early years where you can there can be a classroom full of 3 to 6 year olds, and some of them won't be able to sing in tune at the age of 3, but by the age of 6, after doing all the nursery rhymes, they will be able to sing in tune. And so, okay, that person now has the potential to become a musician. But beyond that, if you go beyond the age of 6, 7, 8, and you can't sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in tune, chances are you never will be able to.
No.
And so, there's all kinds of studies and the PhDs and things done on when music embeds itself and how, and if we're born gifted and if we're born with natural good pitching or perfect pitch or whatever. But ultimately, if you are an adult and you've been told you can't sing in tune, chances are you're going to be spending a lot of money on singing lessons just to get you to the very basic level that the majority of people, let's say 75% of people, naturally already have. So it's very, very difficult for some people.
And I think one of the reasons why there's it's a very difficult thing to say to someone that you can't sing. It's like telling someone you have BO. It's quite personal. And there's no other instrument I've found that can affect your confidence quite as much as singing. If you're in a situation where you're not feeling confident, or your sound isn't right, or you take a knock from something, it can really hit you hard. And that's because I don't think there is anything more personal than our own voice. And to know that you can't sort of achieve, as you say, even like a base level of singing. For some people, they would rather sort of be like, oh no, I'm sure I can sing, it's fine. But this isn't a diss to people who can't sing, by the way. It's just the realities of the world. You can try, and I've had this experience as well with my limited capacity of working with other singers. Some people who, even trying to get them to sing at one single note in tune, and you're like, okay, go, ah, and they're like, ah, 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 and then they ask you, am I in tune? Or is that right? And you're like, where do I start from? If you can't hear our starting note, we've got nothing we can build on. So, and it's a real shame, because it would be great if we could all. And you can,
if there are people watching that are like, oh, that's me. There are ways, there are techniques, and there are things that you can do to get that person to hear it. But the question really is, how much do you want this? Because your base level is so much, you're at such a disadvantage when the majority of people, like I say, by the age of 8 or 10 can sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in tune, and you're 35, 45, 55, whatever age it is, and you can't sing in tune yet, you've got a lot of catching up to do. And so it's just like, how long are you guys going to spend sitting at the piano, playing a note, trying to sing a note and missing, playing a note, trying to sing a note and missing? That's not productive.
No.
So can you teach anyone to sing? I mean, maybe I just don't have the patience to.
No, I think this is the thing I like about you. You're honest and you're a realist. And that's a big difference between, and I'll talk about some online vocal coaches I've watched who do go down the, anybody can sing, everyone's got that inner angel inside them, and you're willing to say something that, as you say, could potentially cost you business. So who would you trust more? Someone with that level of honesty? Or there is I'm not going to mention his name. He cracks me up. But his shtick is, if I can't sing it, it can't be done.
Okay.
Now, wow, that's a statement.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I actually asked him about one of my favourite singers who tends to sing in a lot of that kind of head mixed range. And I said, could you do, I mean, the guy is very, very good at what he does.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's a real belter, and he's got a great range. He's got loads of power. His technique is really, really good. And he sounds brilliant. And I asked him about singing this different style. And he says, I said, could you do a video in the style of this guy? And he's like, oh, well, I could, but that guy can't sing like that now for obvious reasons.
Right.
And it's like, he can, because he's still out touring it and doing it. It's just, it's not your style. And rather than just admitting that, you're willing to sort of poo-poo him and just say, no, he can't do that anymore. Do you find, and this is something actually we can go on to talking about now, because we were going to talk about the different schools of singing and attitude. There's here we go. We're both getting involved. Is there a level of arrogance when it comes to different schools of singing and different singing teachers who believe that their way is the only way?
100%. But it's a business.
Yeah.
And you got to remember that, you know.
True.
There are, if you compare it to the fitness industry and the several different training programs and courses that one could undertake or something like that. And it's like, here's a list of my clients that did these things. Look at their transformation photos. You know, it's the same thing. Like it's a business. And if you're flogging a product, then you've got to believe in that product, or at least make people believe in that product. So the schools of thought behind singing, I mean, first of all, I'm sort of a jack of all trades, if that makes sense, in that I've dabbled in like a lot of different training styles. And I have had a lot of different vocal coaches and singing teachers, some fantastic, some absolutely awful. And I've learned something from every single one. Yeah. Even if that's learning what not to do, right? So, I mean, you could name some, if you've heard of some schools of singing thought, some pedagogies, then by all means, like chuck them at me and I'll tell you if I know anything about them. But the main one that I think of in this country anyway is Still training. Okay. So Still was kind of like, I would say like quite a cornerstone of contemporary vocalist training for quite a few years, like the last 20 years maybe. And the nice thing about that school is that it was very anatomically based. So there was quite a lot of science behind it. There was a lot of research that went into it. And I think that's why it sort of gathered like a kind of cult following, a bit of a good reputation. But I do use the word cult purposefully because unfortunately it did turn into a little bit of a kind of, Tony Robbins kind of here's our amazing school. And by the way, it's 195 for the early bird. And then you can upgrade for this and upgrade for that. And it ended up feeling a little bit, the next thing was it felt a little bit pyramid schemey when they started bringing out the training courses for teachers. So become an Still teacher. And sure. I don't know, I sort of fell out of love with it at that kind of point. So I think there's a lot to be had and a lot of knowledge to be gained from Still training. But another thing that I sometimes worry about with these schools of thought is, like you said, like it's sort of their way or the highway. There's another school of thought which I won't mention, but I totally disagree with some of their technical explanations. I think some of their research is built on bollocks, and I think some of their techniques are dangerous, and yet they're really, really good at selling themselves. And so it can be a bit of a worry. But the other thing as well is that they're making everybody sound like identical copies, clones. My whole ethos as a singer, as an alternative singer, is I want to break the box. I don't want to sound like everybody else.
Yeah.
And, having said that, I think there's a lot to be said for classical training, for operatic training. There's so much that even a contemporary rock singer can learn from having some operatic grounding in their voice. But it's the same across the board. It's like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and a little bit of that, and I'll find my own way, I think is sometimes the best approach. And ultimately, we can't be considered a one size fits all. I always come back to that. Like, we're all different. So if there was one course that worked for everybody, we'd all be doing it for a start. But secondly, wouldn't we all sound the same? And it's just not possible. We just don't come from that
That's a really good
standpoint.
point, and I think that's going to lead on to a really good question, which is coming up after this quick cut-off. And we're back. Right, as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, my microphone has reappeared. It's gradually working its way south as the interview goes on. All I can say is invest in better hardware and microphone stands for the future. So what you were talking about there, I think, is a really, really good subject. So as you were saying also about certain schools of singers, basically everyone just sounding exactly the same. And I have noticed that when I've watched, especially when you get, for example, like backing singers and tour singers, and you get these people who can sing absolutely impeccably, and you know that they could deliver night after night after night. But if you put them all in a sort of, you had one singing after the other, you'd be very hard pressed to really tell much of a difference.
Yeah.
And I remember Alfie Boe, the marvellous Alfie Boe, the king of musical belt, as Michael Ball said, he's very loud. But he did a really good documentary about Freddie Mercury. And Alfie sung a version of The Show Must Go On. And he was listening back to it and he said, I'm listening to this. He said, yeah, every note is where it needs to be. It's all accurate. He said, but it just sounds lifeless. He said, it doesn't sound anything like Freddie. It hasn't got that kind of delivery, that punch, that charisma. And is there a thing, and I think this is what ties in with what you're saying, it's if you pick, not necessarily pick and choose, because obviously we want to be careful about, what we learn, how we learn it, and what we deliver when we're singing. But taking all these bits that will benefit us, but not allowing it to completely consume and change us into something that just sounds very clinical. We allow it. We keep our that substance of what makes us in our voice.
I think that's a really hard thing for singers to do, though, because so two things. A lot of singers will be encouraged to sound the same as other vocalists. So you mentioned backing vocalists. I'm going to mention backing vocalists, choral singers, musical theatre singers, opera singers. Quite often these people are seen as instruments that should all be replaceable and sound the same, right? So it is, in some school of thought, it is built into the training that you should be sounding replaceable. Right? So the idea
you have a lifespan and we need to replace you at a certain point.
The idea is to sound like everyone else, that is part of the thing. So unless you get a coach who understands that your ambition is to find a unique sound, and that might not be for everybody.
Yeah.
So there's that. But then there's this other idea which I come across so often with students, which is that most of the time we try and escape the things that make us sound unique because we see them as our flaws.
Yeah. So
I have this exercise which I do, which is I allow people to listen to two versions of Hallelujah, the Leonard Cohen song, but I don't use the Leonard Cohen version. I use Jeff Buckley version, and I use the Alexandra Burke from X Factor version. Okay. And I asked them to listen to the two, and I asked them to find, spot the difference between the two, and, what do we find emotive and what don't we find emotive. And the X Factor sound is striving for perfection. It's striving for every note is almost very definitely auto-tuned. Every note will be trying to have a nice melisma at the end of it, a nice even vibrato. It will be belted. Technically it comes from, it's singing teacher's porn, right?
Yeah.
If you listen to the Jeff Buckley version, you're going to get a completely different experience. You're going to hear bumps in the road of his sustained notes. You're going to hear cracks in his voice. You're going to hear pitch bends. You're going to hear roughness where perhaps he didn't intend to have roughness. You're going to hear his voice emotively break. Now, if you might think that if I listen to those two, which do I prefer listening to? As a vocal coach, maybe I should prefer listening to the Alexandra Burke version, but I absolutely cannot stand it.
Yeah.
I crave those flaws and those errors and those bumps in the road and those wobbles that only could have been created through feeling.
It's the magic, isn't it?
It's the things that you can't capture. Now, there are certain people, Freddie Mercury being an example of this, Jeff Buckley being an example of this. There are certain people that are so unashamedly themselves that it can't be corrected. It's like, even if they try and do the best possible vocal take that they can do, they've had that something about that musical upbringing, the right balance of rock influence, opera influence, classical training, jazz training. Like, there's so much going on in there that even if they're trying to do everything right, like, it's so wrong in someone's textbook.
Yeah.
That there's a juiciness about their voice that is, like, to me, I can sort of break it down and I can sort of tell exactly what is happening, but I can tell most of the time that the person who's singing it didn't intend for that even to happen. It's just a stamp of their voice. It's a vocal imprint that you won't get from actually being perfect. Does that make any sense whatsoever?
Absolutely.
That's a weird way of putting it.
I completely understand I think, unfortunately, with the kind of generations that have come from, your Britain's Got Talents, your X Factors, especially auto-tune as well, damn it to Hades. It's one of those things that I think voices, this is the weirdly disturbing thing. Like, if you listen to old recordings, I mean, there was a classic one, I think it was Cilla Black when she sung, and I always associated Cilla Black with, surprise, surprise, and all that. But she sung the song Alfie. Was it What's It All About, Alfie? Yeah. It's stunning. Yeah. It's absolutely beautiful. But she had to record that. I can't remember. It was like over 50 times because he was so precise on what he wanted. And of course, you listen back to that and he wanted to capture that exact emotion, the right feeling. It wasn't all about everything being textbook and every line being immaculate. It was the overall performance of what you want to hear. And there's a guy on YouTube now who, what he does is he goes through and listens to songs and checks if they've been auto-tuned or not. And they are actually now going back over old albums for remastering and auto-tuning the vocals. And you can hear how it just kills it. Yeah. Completely dead. And that's the kind of generation that, or the generations that are now sort of growing up, hearing that kind of stilted, everything is bang on the note, and it just loses all its flavour.
I mean, it's creating a generation that have what I would call like audio dysmorphia. So instead of like body dysmorphia, audio dysmorphia. So they are not actually able to see what a real voice sounds like or hear what a real voice sounds like.
We can hear.
Speaking of which,
I was just going to say we can hear what a real voice sounds like.
Just bear with me a second. I'll be back in a minute.
No problem. Hello, young person.
Hello.
Hello.
We might have to finish this with a baby with us.
That's absolutely fine.
I've got a very clingy young man here that, unfortunately, he's not happy with anyone else. So,
but has more
hair.
hair.
Give us some vocal
than
demonstration.
Me.
What do you think?
Hello, young man. How are you doing, sir? Nice to meet you, fella. Hello.
Anyway, his name's Orist.
Orist.
Yeah,
Orist. The world. Orist.
So anyway, sorry about that little outburst, but he's got his mother's lungs. What can I say?
He has. He's got power. He's going places.
Where were we? I've forgotten
that's a very good question. And you were talking about the generation where audio dysmorphia.
Oh, yeah. So I think this idea of like auto-tuning everything, and then this comes down to like, I could start rambling on about Spotify and how unhealthy Spotify is and playlisting and this and that. But basically, I think that auto-tune and synthetic instruments as well to a certain degree, and how cheap they are in comparison to real instruments and real players. I think we are building a new culture of listeners. So the listening experience is like cultivating unrealistic expectations when you go to see a live gig.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So I don't feel like young, let's call them young adults, but basically anyone from 16 through to the age of 26 now, I don't feel like a lot of them, if they're just listening to Radio 1, actually have a good grasp on what real music sounds like, as in organic instruments. Not that synthetic instruments can't be real music, but as in organic, untampered with.
No, definitely. There is... I've started seeing more, especially with students who I teach and everything, that, and it could also be an age thing as well, but there seems to be a lot of people who are sort of saying that, you're like, so what music do you like? Oh, just whatever's about. People don't seem to have that same connection. And I think, as you said, because there's so much of it, whereas back in the day, you heard that if you go really, really far back to the mists of time, with vinyl, and it was difficult to get hold of a particular artist or a particular record. And once you heard it, you're like, oh my God, it's a tangible thing I'm listening to. Rather than now, where it's, as you said, with playlists, it's okay, that. It's like internet scrolling. You literally.
Most of the time, people don't even know who the artist is that they're listening to, and actually we are in a place now where it could be AI, and you've been none the wiser. And unfortunately, it may as well be in the next 5 years, because we're going to be heading there. So it's just scary. And I think what it's going to, this again, I've done a documentary on Spotify, and one of the things that I talk about is, what does it look like next? And I think it is in some ways potentially going to be quite good for real musicians, in a way that I think it's going to create a divide between people who understand what they're listening to and seek out real music again, and people who just don't understand what they're listening to, and so they'll end up listening to the robots, and that's fine.
I agree. There's a quick point we'll get onto, and then we shall let you have your afternoon back with your lovely child. Something on that subject, I've noticed that a lot of bands who now use backing tracks and things, because they've got so much bad feedback from people saying, oh, well, he played a note wrong here, he sung wrong here. That there's so much criticism that people are scared to go out and be
terrified. And mistakes are just so unusual to an audience these days.
And that's for any musician who's been out there. And you can be as practiced as you like, but there will be, whether it's your favorite guitarist, whether it's your favorite singer, they are going to make mistakes. It's part of being human, but it's also part of that moment and the magic of that moment, that, when a singer does something slightly different, or maybe their voice cracks on something, or something, Dave Grohl breaking down during, the performance for Taylor Hawkins. It's things like that are those that connect us with music and musicians. It's the feeling behind it, not just this generic, as you said, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between AI or, you know, some of this program stuff where you've just got a super auto-tune voice over the top. Yeah. Could be anybody. You're just not going to know the difference. But last thing I wanted to ask you, have you noticed, being a teacher, that when sort of the X Factor generation and everything came in, terrible English, did you notice a shift at all in teaching of what people wanted and what their expectations were?
Yeah, so everybody wanted to learn how to belt and how to do melismas. So runs, you know. I think that's quite toxic, really, because actually it's if you watch an episode of X Factor, someone can sing a long-held sustained note and get a round of applause, or someone can sing a series of like a 42-note melisma and get a round of applause. Those notes don't have to be in tune.
No,
because the audience don't even know the difference between good pitching and bad pitching. I tell you who does, apparently, is Simon Cowell, and if he says it's bad, it's pitchy, then all of a sudden you've got your Aunt Flo telling you, oh yeah, I heard, that was off as well, I didn't like that. So, and I think it's just that's the nature of competition singing. And if it's beauty pageant singing, it's pitching people against each other for all the wrong reasons. And so people are taking it to the extreme, and the extreme in vocals is how long can I hold a note for and how many notes can I squeeze into the smallest amount of time. And there's no subtlety involved in competition singing. And there's, that idea of like working on your craft so much so that you make it sound effortless is not appreciated. Because again, X Factor sort of assumes that nobody's had training and that these are all people that can just naturally sing. And that's, again, like the toxic sort of side of the competition singing. So, yeah, it's a beast of its own. And again, a bit like Spotify, I feel like X Factor and Spotify have a lot to answer for when it comes to what we're listening to at the moment on the radio. I think it's a travesty.
I agree, and there is so much more we could talk about, and
we will do. Let's do a part 2.
But so what I'm going to do in the description below in the video, exactly, my man. See if you can get him to point down like that. Below are the links to Mummy's various musical dalliances. So we're going to put your links to your bands. We're going to put links to your teaching. So please, ladies and gents, go and check all of those out. It will be absolutely 100% worth your time. Thank you. It's been everything and more than I knew it would be. So it's been an absolute pleasure, and really nice to meet you, young sir.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry if I get a bit rambly. It's because I'm very, very passionate about it all.
No, it's passion and music is kind of the two go hand in hand. So, and it's but the difference is you're passionate from a place of someone who has experience, knowledge. This is what you do. So therefore, it means a lot more coming from someone like you than some randomer who believes that because they've watched one YouTube video, they know how to sing.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
A pleasure. You have yourself a lovely afternoon, and we'll see you for part 2.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the interview, ladies and gents. I certainly enjoyed taking part in it and interviewing her. She's not only a phenomenal coach, but she's also an absolutely awesome person as well. And I'm very, very fortunate to have her in my life as a vocal coach, teacher, whatever terminology you prefer. Please, please, please check out the links below of all her goings on, her projects, her teaching and everything. Please look hard, investigate. You will not be disappointed. So a huge thank you to everybody for watching this, and also a massive thank you to Georgia for being just ruddy awesome. So take care, everyone, and we'll see you on the next video. Mwah. Much love to you all.